Hello, my name is Maria Galvez, and I'm currently a BS MPA combined degree program student. I decided to do my research paper on Japan because I know that Japan has always been prone to major disasters, and I thought it would be interesting to know exactly how the Japanese government dealt with disasters happening all the time. The rationale behind the Japanese government's approach to disaster management evolved after several disasters struck Japan and a large number of citizens died. Japan is a country that is considered one of the most disaster-prone in the world because of its geographical, topographical, and meteorological conditions. Japan is located on the Ring of Fire, which exposes Japan to earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, torrential rains, volcanic eruptions, and floods. Japan has been struck by 52 major disasters since 1947, where at least 10 or more individuals died or were reported missing. In Japan, the disaster management system has been developed and strengthened following the bitter experiences of large-scale disasters and actions. Disaster Management Acts started out in the late 1940s with the establishment of the Disaster Relief Act. The purpose of the Disaster Relief Act is to provide essential emergency relief in the event of a disaster through the cooperation of local governments, non-governmental organizations such as the Japanese Red Cross Society, and the general public to protect the disaster victims and maintain social order. The current disaster management system of Japan was first established in 1961 after the Aizen typhoon in 1959. The Japanese government decided to create the Disaster Countermeasures Basic Act of 1961. The Disaster Countermeasures Basic Act is considered to be the turning point in the history of modern disaster management systems in Japan. The Disaster Countermeasures Basic Act of 1961 defined protection of national land as well as citizens' lives, livelihoods, and property from natural disasters as a national priority. The most important role of the Disaster Countermeasures Basic Act of 1961 is that it sets the guidelines for the order in which governmental administrative levels should respond in case of a disaster, and it also outlines the responsibilities for each administrative level. The three levels of governmental administration include the national level, prefectural level, and municipal level. The figure above explains the bottom-up implementation pattern that the Disaster Countermeasures Basic Act outlines. In Japan's disaster management system, it is the responsibility of the affected municipalities to respond to disasters, and only in extreme cases where the municipalities cannot handle the disaster consequences do the related prefectures support the municipalities by carrying overall coordination efforts. Whenever the prefectures are having difficulty handling the situation, the national government steps in to help. In large-scale disasters affecting wide areas, the Prefectural Emergency Relief Headquarters is expected to play a central role in the recovery process. Each administrative level is in charge of creating their own disaster management plans that account for all types of disasters for that specific region. Although each administration level has their own disaster management plan, they must follow the basic guidelines of the Basic Disaster Management Plan created by the Central Disaster Management Council. Due to several severe earthquakes, Japan has created an effective countermeasure for earthquake disasters. Earthquakes like the Great Kanto Earthquake of 1923, the Great Hashin Awahi Earthquake of 1995, and the Great East Earthquake of 2011 have shaped the countermeasures taken by Japan to handle the four phases of disaster management. Japan has also developed an observation system to monitor seismic activity, and to do this, the Japanese government works closely with Japan Meteorological Agency. The Japan Meteorological Agency works closely with other organizations to install and maintain seismometers that are used for estimating the location of an epicenter and magnitude of an earthquake, as well as for tsunami warnings. Depending on the magnitude of the earthquake, the Japanese government has decided that if the Japan Meteorological Agency measures an earthquake magnitude of 5 or greater, they will issue an earthquake early warning. The second hazard I would like to talk about is tsunamis. Japan is prone to tsunamis because of its location of being surrounded by water. In addition to local tsunamis generated by earthquakes near the coast, Japan has also suffered major damages from distant tsunamis generated by open sea earthquakes. The Japan Meteorological Agency plays an important role in the countermeasures of tsunami disasters because they are in charge of issuing a tsunami warning 2 to 3 minutes after an earthquake and announces the height and arrival of the tsunami. Tsunami countermeasures include the expedition of warning, the preparing guidelines for the creation of tsunami hazard maps, and the designation of tsunami evacuation buildings by local governments. The third hazard is volcanic eruptions. The Japanese government believes that the best way to protect individuals from being harmed during these types of disaster is to have an accurate reading of the precursors of volcanic eruptions, broadcast appropriate information, and wide area networks to ensure rapid and orderly evacuation in the event of an eruption. Storms and flood is the last hazard I would like to talk about. The Japanese government has taken steps to reduce the population percentage that is affected by storms and floods by floods owing to soil conservation and flood control projects over many years. The Japan Meteorological Agency works to measure rainfall, wind speeds, air temperature, and wind direction. The Japanese government works closely with the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism and prefectural government to measure water levels in steep rivers to prevent flooding from occurring. The Japanese government has amended the Flood Control Act and the Act of Promotion of Sediment Disaster Countermeasures for sediment disaster-prone areas. The amendments require individuals to familiarize themselves with hazard maps and evacuation routes of inundation and landslide-prone areas. The Japanese disaster management system establishes the collaboration of not only government agencies but also public and private sector agencies, as well as the general public, in order to be effective with all 4 stages of the emergency management system. Japan has a close working relationship with other national and public organizations that help during the disaster management process. Such organizations include Japan Broadcasting Company, where it plays a key role because they are in charge of announcing emergency warnings when a disaster is about to strike. The Japan Broadcasting Company works closely with the Japan Meteorological Agency and the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism to make sure warnings are being issued accordingly. Another participant of the disaster management policy in Japan is the Building Research Institute. The Building Research Institute is involved in the response phase of emergency management. The institute assesses buildings after disasters to prevent secondary consequences to a disaster. Some obstacles that the Japanese emergency management system may have is that many comment on Japanese decentralized disaster management system because although the response system is detailed for each administrative level, it is difficult to be cohesive. One of the biggest weaknesses of Japan is that their lack of cohesiveness when it comes to decision making. In Japan, in times of emergency, the Prime Minister must approve what is being done. There are stages of inquiry, report, option, and then action. This prevents response teams to act in a less timely manner to victims.